In a forgotten corner of the dense Pine Hollow forest, nestled deep within the shadows of towering trees, stood an old, decaying house. The locals whispered about it in hushed tones, passing down stories of strange occurrences and mysterious disappearances. The house had once been grand, a sprawling estate owned by a wealthy family. But after a series of tragic events, the family vanished without a trace, and the house was abandoned to the creeping vines and encroaching darkness of the forest. Despite the warnings and the chilling stories, Michael and Lisa, a young couple with a passion for exploring the unknown, decided to investigate the house. They had heard the tales, of course, the stories of eerie lights flickering in the windows at night, of distant screams that echoed through the forest, and of the unsettling feeling that you were never truly alone within the house's walls. But to them, it was all just local folklore, exaggerated over time. They were excited by the thrill of uncovering the truth behind the legends. The day they chose for their adventure was overcast, the sky a dull gray that seemed to sap the color from the world. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. The path leading to the house was barely visible, overgrown with brambles and weeds. As they approached, the house loomed before them, its once white walls now mottled with age and neglect. The windows, cracked and filthy, stared back at them like vacant eyes. "Looks like nobody's been here in decades," Michael said, his voice betraying a mix of excitement and unease. "Perfect," Lisa replied with a grin. "That means we'll be the first to uncover its secrets." They stepped onto the creaking porch, the wood groaning under their weight. The door, surprisingly, was unlocked. It swung open with a long, drawn-out creak, revealing a dark hallway that seemed to stretch on forever. Dust hung heavy in the air, and the smell of mildew was overpowering. Michael flicked on his flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness to reveal peeling wallpaper, cobweb-covered furniture, and a thick layer of dust coating everything. "This place is a time capsule," Lisa said, her voice echoing eerily in the silence. They ventured further into the house, their footsteps muffled by the thick dust on the floor. The air was stifling, heavy with the weight of years of neglect. As they explored room after room, they found signs of the lives that had once been lived there. A child's doll lying forgotten in a corner, an old photograph of the family who had owned the house, their faces frozen in time. But as they moved deeper into the house, a sense of unease began to settle over them. The air grew colder, the shadows longer. The house seemed to hum with a low, almost imperceptible vibration, as if it were alive, watching them. Lisa tried to shake off the feeling, but it clung to her like a shroud. In the back of the house, they found a door that led down to the basement. The door was different from the others, heavy and reinforced with iron bands. It felt out of place in the otherwise stately home, as if it were meant to keep something in rather than out. "Think there's anything down there?" Michael asked, trying to sound casual, but Lisa could hear the nervousness in his voice. "Only one way to find out," she replied, though her own voice wavered. They descended the narrow, creaking staircase, the air growing colder with each step. The flashlight beam flickered and dimmed as they reached the bottom. The basement was larger than they had expected, with low ceilings and walls lined with shelves filled with strange, dusty objects, jars filled with murky liquids, old books with titles written in an unfamiliar language, and peculiar artifacts that seemed out of place in a family home. In the center of the room was a large wooden chest, its surface carved with intricate patterns that seemed to shift and change in the dim light. The chest seemed to pulse, with an energy all its own, drawing them toward it. "Do you think we should open it?" Michael asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yeah," Lisa replied, though she wasn't sure why. Something about the chest compelled her, an overwhelming curiosity that she couldn't resist. With trembling hands, they lifted the heavy lid. Inside, they found a collection of old letters, yellowed with age, and a small ornate box. Lisa reached for the box, her fingers brushing against the cool metal. As she lifted it from the chest, the room seemed to grow darker, the shadows closing in around them. She opened the box. Inside was a small, intricately carved figurine, unlike anything they had ever seen before. The figure was of a humanoid shape, but distorted, with elongated limbs and hollow, empty eyes. The air around them grew thick, oppressive, as if the house itself were holding its breath. As Lisa held the figurine, she felt a sudden sharp pain in her chest. She gasped, dropping the box as she stumbled back. The pain was unlike anything she had ever felt, a searing, burning sensation that spread through her body like wildfire. Michael rushed to her side, but as he touched her, he recoiled in horror. Lisa's eyes had turned black, completely void of color. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, and her veins stood out in stark relief, dark and pulsing. She opened her mouth to scream, but no sound came out, only a cold, chilling wind that seemed to come from within her. The house began to shake, the walls groaning and creaking, as if they were being pulled apart. The shelves rattled, jars shattering as they hit the floor. The chest slammed shut with a deafening bang, and the basement was plunged into darkness. Michael fumbled with the flashlight, his hands shaking uncontrollably, but when he managed to turn it back on, Lisa was gone. Panicking, he searched the basement, calling her name, but there was no sign of her. The only thing left was the small figurine lying on the floor where she had dropped it. He hesitated, then picked it up, feeling its cold surface against his skin. The moment he did, the whispering started. It was faint at first, just a low murmur in the back of his mind, but it grew louder, more insistent, a cacophony of voices that seemed to come from every corner of the basement. The walls seemed to close in on him, the darkness pressing down from all sides. The whispers spoke of things he could barely comprehend, ancient rituals, forbidden knowledge, and a hunger that had been waiting for centuries to be awakened. Michael backed away, trying to reach the stairs, but the darkness was all-consuming. The flashlight flickered and died, leaving him in absolute blackness. The whispers grew louder, and he felt something cold brush against his arm, fingers long and bony reaching out from the void. He turned to run, but the basement had changed. The walls seemed to stretch and twist, the ceiling lowering as if it were collapsing in on him. The whispers became screams, a chorus of voices crying out in pain and terror. He tripped, falling to the ground, the figurine slipping from his grasp and skittering across the floor. As he scrambled to his feet, he saw it, Lisa, or what had once been Lisa, standing in the darkness. Her eyes were still black, her skin ghostly white. But there was something else, an aura of malevolence that radiated from her, a darkness that seemed to pulse and breathe. She opened her mouth and the whispers poured out, a torrent of voices that echoed through the basement. "Join us," they whispered. "Join us in the dark." Michael ran, blindly groping for the stairs. The walls seemed to close in, the whispers deafening. He could feel the cold fingers brushing against him, grasping at his clothes, pulling him back. But somehow he reached the stairs, practically crawling up them, the whispers following him every step of the way. He burst through the door and slammed it shut, leaning against it as he tried to catch his breath. The house was silent now, the oppressive air lifted, but the silence was worse than the whispers. It was as if the house was waiting, watching him. He fled the house, not stopping until he reached the edge of the forest. The gray sky had darkened, and a cold wind blew through the trees. He turned back to look at the house, its broken windows staring back at him, empty and hollow. But as he stood there, trying to catch his breath, he realized something horrifying. The whispers hadn't stopped. They were still there, in the back of his mind, faint, but growing louder. He ran, not stopping until he reached his car. He fumbled with the keys, his hands shaking uncontrollably. The whispers were louder now, echoing through his mind, filling him with a dread he couldn't escape. He drove away, the forest and the house receding into the distance, but the whispers followed him. They were inside him now, a part of him. In the days that followed, Michael tried to resume his normal life, but the whispers were relentless. They spoke to him in his dreams, filling his mind with dark thoughts and terrible images. He could see Lisa's face, twisted and distorted, her black eyes staring into his soul. He couldn't escape the darkness that had taken root inside him. The house was gone, burned to the ground in a mysterious fire a few days after they had left. The locals said it was a sign, a final cleansing of the evil that had haunted the forest for so long. But Michael knew better. The house might be gone, but its darkness had found a new home. One night, as he sat in his apartment, the whispers growing louder, he felt a familiar coldness in the air. The lights flickered, and for a moment he saw her, Lisa, standing in the corner, her black eyes boring into him. She smiled, and the whispers swelled to a deafening roar. Michael tried to scream, but the darkness swallowed him whole. The locals in Pine Hollow still tell stories about the house in the forest, though now they speak of the fire that destroyed it. They say that the forest is safe again, that the darkness has been vanquished. But they don't know the truth. They don't hear the whispers that still echo in the shadows, waiting for the next unsuspecting soul to listen. For in the forgotten corners of the world, where the light of day never fully reaches, the darkness waits. It watches, it whispers, and it never, ever leaves.